Morning, councillors. Meeting reconvened 10:53 a.m. All councillors present, plus additional officer, two officers, Kenny Lawrence and Aaron Ski. Right. Project progress report 342. I have somebody move that we receive that report, please. Councillor Plum, seconded Councillor Hanson. Those in favour? 7-0. Comments, Ahmed?
Take it as read. We go for questions.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Peebles? Do you have any questions?
No.
Councillor Gleeson?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hanson? No, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Plum?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Agenda item 343, can I have somebody please move the Community Care Services report be received? Councillor Peebles, seconded Councillor Plum. Those in favour? 7-0. So Matt. Do you want to point out the change here for the first time ever? Well, I will, because it's a credit to all involved in the work that's been getting undertaken in a review of this business unit and accounting for it. For the first time, we're seeing both a year-to-date actual and a projected annual after indirect costs are removed profit from those business units. So, even at break even, after indirect costs were in front. So well done.
And we'll have a better picture of this in the mid-year review, Mr. Mayor, but at this stage, giving a positive figure at the end of the year.
Excellent. Questions for Summer, please? Okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we did carry out a detailed review internally of the CHS payment flow and are looking for gaps where we can improve service delivery. So that will result in more better service delivery, maybe not profit on that, but improve service delivery to the clients in our region.
No questions. Right. Can I have a procedural motion, please, that we revert to agenda item, whatever the planning scheme is?
337.
337. Moved Councillor Plum, seconded Councillor Arthur, that we return to agenda item 337. Those in favour? Carried 7-0. Right, I will just hold whilst we wait for our Zoom. It's already there.
No.
Kate, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Excellent.
Can you hear me fine?
G'day Kate, how are you? Sean Dillon here.
That's all, my man.
Right, so you may struggle to see all of us because we're very small, but we can all see you very clearly. But we also have in front of us, that's right, yep, sorry, just technically sorting something. Okay, so we all have our documentation for the planning scheme. We're about to commence consideration of the report and the 5 recommendations. Councillors, very important decision as a result of this, in that it is not a commonplace thing to adopt a new planning scheme. In terms of the history of this council, this is the first time it's ever occurred. It is truly it is a document that will reflect this council's intent towards facilitation of development into the future, both in terms of new development from scratch based on new economic development opportunities, as well as enhancements to existing residences, businesses or vacant blocks of land. It does have some substantive changes from the 3 planning schemes that we currently operate under, in terms of its modernisation of the recognition of legislation that applies to planning in Queensland, but also its recognition of the style and types of development that this council wishes to see more easily facilitated, with less red tape and less onerous implications, as well as those styles of developments that in certain areas this council wishes to see go through a more rigorous assessment process. The strategic statements and the strategic mapping is a critical component of the regional planning scheme, in that it not only guides what assessment benchmarks may be created into the future, but is a clear signal to external, internal developers and state and federal governments around this council's future growth opportunities and business development opportunities into the future. Obviously, there is still 2 steps in the process. There is the step today for council to submit to the Planning Minister, the Deputy Premier, for his approval, and then there'll be a final resolution required subsequent to the Deputy Premier's approval. I'm probably going to ask for Kate to start here in a moment. There is a massive suite of documents, as I outlined to you yesterday. The planning scheme itself is consistent. Documents are consistent with those that have been now available for quite some time. It is the report, the consultation report that commences on page 81 of your agenda and runs through to, I'm sorry, page, what is it about?
185, 90?
A bit further, I think, because there's some appendixes attached to that, especially appendixes B and C, which is the consideration of submissions. Can I thank at the outset council officers and our consultants for their facilitation and assistance through the public consultation phase, the collation of those submissions and the responses that we are required now under legislation to give clear consideration to, because the consideration of and the action that we take to each of those submissions needs to be presented to the Planning Minister to give show evidence of our consideration of each submission. Kate, would you like to add anything further to the process before you start and walk us through those submissions, so that we can clearly demonstrate that our active consideration of them, and then move to the active resolutions?
No, nothing further in terms of process other than what's set out in the report, which effectively requires those 5 resolutions which have been proposed to recommend that they come about from the process, which is set out in section 82, 3 notice issued some time ago now by the Chief Executive Planning Act.
Okay, so with Council's indulgence, could we go to, because it is the first recommendation in our agenda, if we could go to that consultation report, and then Kate, if you want to lead us through that report, and I guess expressly through to the areas that where council will need to decide today its response to the submissions, whether it's in line with your recommendation or an alternative. Bear in mind, councillors, that, well, Kate, can you explain please to council what would happen if council was to make a decision in terms of its response to a submission that significantly altered the planning scheme? Could you just remind councillors the implications of that decision, as well as, and then what we'll do in terms of process here, councillors, is tick off with your support each of the responses. We won't have them as formal motions. I'll seek from each of you whether you support or don't support each submission, each response to the submissions, and then we'll reserve the right for a formal vote against or for when we start to walk through the officer's recommendations at the start of the report. So that will clearly allow you to participate even if you may be against the overall intent of the planning scheme or in favour. It still allows you to have your input on individual decisions that will need to be made with respect to response. So Kate, I'll just leave to you now to speak to your consultation report and also to remind councillors of the implications of significant alteration to the planning scheme.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So, a significantly different change to a planning scheme which arises as a result of consultation, for example, in response to a submission, is actually a term that's defined under the Minister's Rules and Guidelines and within the Section 18.3 process that we're following in this plan making exercise. If a change is made in response to submissions or in response to the public consultation, which results in a significantly different version of the planning scheme to the one that was publicly notified and put out for public consultation, it actually triggers a re-notification process. It does not necessarily mean you have to go out to the full community for the full 40 days again, but it will trigger commensurate re-notification and re-consultation on the changes, because a policy position of significance is being changed from the version that you previously saw to the version that the council may choose to proceed with. Things that can make a planning scheme significantly different are a change to a policy position from what was put out to the community for public consultation, and a change to a zone or something that affects individuals' property rights. A change to a new zone would also constitute a significant difference. Where a submission has been received from someone, so in the existing planning scheme, their lot is zoned one thing, the planning scheme has gone out proposing a different thing. Where their submission is for a reversion or a maintenance of the existing zoning, that is not a significant difference because it's not a zone change, it's actually just conserving or restoring rights. So that's the one, I guess, instance where a change of zone in response to submission would not significantly alter someone's property rights or the expectations of the community at large in terms of property rights. For example, a neighbour or someone living proximate or developing proximate to that. So if we do, as a result of reviewing submissions, want to make a change which is significantly different to the version of the planning scheme, which was publicly consulted, we do just need to be aware that it will trigger a re-consultation process. And that re-consultation is targeted to the people whose property rights or consultation rights may have been affected or may have, I guess, provided a different submission had they been aware of the significantly different matter. So I guess we just keep that in mind as we go through the submissions received in the consultation report. One other thing that you can do when reviewing submissions is you might think that the submission has merit,
Yeah.
but it may require an additional investigation, or it may be something that could be deferred to consideration for a future amendment to the planning scheme at some point post-adoption. And it's not uncommon for planning schemes to go through continual review and continual amendment processes, particularly new planning schemes, because as they begin to be implemented, often there are learnings in that the first 12 months or so from having applied them to the development applications that come. So there are a couple of options when you get a submission. You can accept the submission and make a change. You can refuse to accept the submission and not make a change. Or you can, recognise the submission that was made and decide to carry that over to a further consideration as part of a potential future amendment package. So the consultation report that you've been provided, which is attachment A to the agenda, summarises the consultation activities that were occurred, summarises the formalities and regulatory requirements of consultation. It then looks at each of the submissions which were received, and the consultation report is not allowed to include the personal details of private individuals because it becomes a public document, other than in certain circumstances identifying a particular lot of land or area of land to which the submission applies. So for that purpose, you will see in the submission report that we have given each submission a reference number, which will be S, the number, which is the order that it came in. There is one which is S7A and B. A person made, or two people made a submission, and a neighbour actually sent in a separate letter supporting the content of that submission. So that is why in that case you will find two S7A and B. So it summarises the consultation activities, the number of submissions received. There is a requirement to then give consideration to each submission. And council needs to make a decision as to whether it will accept, reject, or carry over the matters raised.
Councillors, sorry Kate, councillors, I just want to repeat, our process here will be to review each one individually, make a decision on each one. You can be in favour of or against that, but we will do that as a running log, and then there will be a formal resolution to adopt our submissions or our responses in block, and that then allows you the right to vote against or in favour of, depending on your feeling around the whole issue, but still give a clear indication on each one. That was my intent on how we proceed here. Is council happy to do that, or would you like a resolution for every single submission?
I'm happy to proceed with the first option.
Thank you. Majority support for that. Okay, thank you. Kate, sorry for interrupting.
It's okay, Mayor. So I will refer you to two documents as we go through this process. The first is Appendix B of Attachment A, the consultation report, so page 18.
Just wait till everybody's got that up, Kate. Some are working off paper, some are on hard copies, so.
Attachment A, Appendix B, which is page 18.
Yep. All good to you, councillors? Councillor Peebles?
Yeah, with that.
Councillor Gleeson? Hanson? Right, sorry, and the second page, a second document, sorry?
So that gives you a summary of the submissions received. Second document I'll get you to refer to is Attachment G, Table B.
We read all this the same.
Just held forth, sorry, that.
G. Attachment G.
So that's a 5-page document, and Table B commences on page 2.
Is that the document titled Significantly Different Statement? That one?
No, Attachment G, Revision Drafting Register.
Is it in your consultation report?
No, it's not in the consultation report, it's a separate attachment to the agenda report.
That one.
This one, revised draft.
Did it appear before the maps or after?
It's the last one in your documents. Revised draft and register. Yep. So it should be the last attachment under 337. Around page 186 or so.
It's a separate document in our PTQ.
Yes, it was separate in there, yeah.
The reason I'm going to refer to the report to point you to that is because that will tell you where in the proposed planning scheme document that you have.
Just, Kate, just in the interest of meeting expediency here, I may adjourn briefly. Councillors, how many of you are going to want a copy of this so that because you're working off a device, do you want one of these two documents? The smaller one is actually the front one, Appendix B. Would you like a copy of Appendix B printed for you? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages so that you can be referring to the revision drafting register at the same time. 1, 2. Okay, just hold. I'm just going to adjourn briefly so we can provide them a written copy of that so they can refer to the two at the same time. Or, actually, sorry, can we put one on the screen? We could roll that forward, couldn't we? We could put Appendix B on the screen.
No, I don't have it in the documents. I don't have the agenda there.
Ah, all right, we'll get a hard copy. So, Kate, just sorry, I'm just going to adjourn briefly.
Oh, no, we,
Okay, we have reconvened at 11:20 a.m. Thanks, Kate. We have on the screen in front of us Appendix B, consideration of submissions, and either on our own screens or in our hands is the revision drafting register table A.
Thank you, Mayor. So the attachment A, Appendix B, is each of the submissions, and we'll run through them in order from S1 to S14. The reason I've given you attachment G, the revision draft register, table 2 of that shows you where in the proposed materials we have made a change, where in the response action column on the Appendix B document we have considered a change would be appropriate. They are subject to Council's review now. So submission S1 correctly identified some matters to be corrected in terms of location of Freedom of Choice Park at Muddaborough, and noted that the same feature had not been identified for Aramat. So we have updated the strategic outcome maps 5 and 6 to reflect that information, and also noted that the non-directional beacon associated with the Barcaldine Airport is now redundant, and so we removed the beacon and the buffer that was provided for it from overlaying up on airport environments. Does anybody have any concerns?
Councillors, are you supportive of the response action here, or in favour?
Yep.
Right, Harry, thank you.
Submission 2 related to a property in Barcaldine, proximate to the ski park, and it raised concerns with flooding. It raised concerns between the difference between the flood mapping provided in the proposed planning scheme and the ski park development application material, which included some mapping and modelling in terms of the impacts of that particular development. Our proposal in respect of the flood mapping has been to propose no change, and that's consistent for each of the submissions which have been received in respect of flood mapping. The reason being is that we believe it adequately reflects or appropriately reflects the Natural Hazards Risk and Resilience Assessment Report, which was prepared to support the preparation of the planning scheme, and that the mapping included in the planning scheme is the mapping that is expected by the state in accordance with the state planning policy guidance material and the principles for plan making with respect to flood hazard.
Comments? Support the recommendation for no change proposed. Those in favour of supporting it? Or one wish to comment first, sorry. Those in favour of the recommendation, please raise your hand. Those against? It is supported.
Submission 3 similarly disputes the flood hazard mapping in relation to land at Ironwood Drive in Barkerwood. Similarly, that submitter was aware of the flood mapping associated with the ski park proposal, which was created for a different purpose. And they questioned whether the new Bourne and Acacia Street and new development at the recreation park, why they are built in a flood hazard area. I guess the submission there is that those, in terms of the planning scheme project, that development is already existing. And so this flood hazard mapping only applies to future development.
Councillors, once you've considered, support the recommendation. Those in favour?
So, Mr Mayor, I'm going to have to ask.
Question?
Yes, please. This one here is just saying that there's no issue with any problems with Bloodwood Drive. That's all it's saying?
Kate, did you hear the question?
No, sorry, I didn't.
I'll show an overlay map specifying Bloodwood Drive in relation to increase in elevation from known past flood events. So is this saying, Kate, that there's no problems to anyone who lives in Ironwood Drive?
It disputes the flood levels shown. The submitter disputes the flood levels shown for the Ironwood Drive area because they don't believe it reflects what their understanding of past ground data levels of past flood events have been, and it was different from the ski park flood modelling, which it is because that ski park flood modelling was done to support a particular development application and was potentially done to a higher level or a more recent model. However, for the purposes of the planning scheme, it was not a township scale model. It was prepared for a specific proposal to model specific impacts of that development proposal for a specific area of land which happened to be on the outskirts of Barkerwood.
Further question, Councillor?
Probably no further questions, Mr Mayor, but I still don't fully understand the mapping has been done in relation to what the flood might be now due to the ski park. Am I right in saying that?
Kate? The question was that, can you repeat your question,
The
Councillor?
mapping now has been done, Kate, to look at possible increased flooding due to the ski park. Is that right?
So the level 2 flood mapping, which was prepared by the under commission by the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, which is the mapping that has been adopted for the planning scheme because it is recognised as the level 2 mapping under the QRA's hierarchy of flood hazard mapping. That is what is being adopted or proposed for adoption in the planning scheme, or inclusion in the planning scheme. The level 2 Queensland Reconstruction Authority commissioned township flood study for Barcaldine, not the more refined and more specific modelling which was prepared and which some property owners saw in the course of Barcaldine Ski Park development application. So the modelling for the ski park proposal went into greater detail in terms of depth, flow, and particular survey marks per lot, than the level 2 mapping for the township area done by the QRA. It was done at a higher level, and it was purely to model and try to identify the 1% annual exceedance probability event outline. So it doesn't say anything, the mapping in the planning scheme doesn't say anything about depth, it just flags that there is a potential risk of flooding in the event of a 1% annual exceedance probability event, so roughly the 1 in 100 year event, which is what is expected to be adopted in terms of best practice planning these days. The purpose of the flood hazard mapping in the planning scheme is purely to trigger for development applicants and for council in its assessment process consideration of potential flood risks for that property with respect to proposed development. So they serve a different purpose, and so they are done at different levels. What this is effectively saying is there's a difference in where that line is drawn between the mapping for the ski park and where the line is drawn based on water.
Does that assist, Councillor?
Yeah, I think so, Mr Mayor.
Further questions for S3? Councillor, please.
Just, Mr Mayor, just want to ask the question. I'm looking at are we comparing maps with maps? On page 142, the flood mapping of Barcaldine. The ski park is not on the map. Is that
No,
is that
wasn't
real?
there when
Right?
this mapping was done.
That's yeah. The mapping was done before the ski park was. So what we're saying and what people are asking the question: has the ski park or is the ski park making any difference to that map that we are looking at on page 142?
Councillor, one of the conditions for the approval of the rec park was that it had to be constructed in such a way as to not impact, and we were to mitigate if it did. That was one of the two errors in the approval and construction of the rec lake by the previous council, and it didn't consider those two things. That was why the lowering of the eastern bank had to occur, to ensure that properties were not adversely affected, in the opinion of the flood engineers, in the event of a 1% AEP event. So the engineering solution and the flood modelling would indicate that the lowering of that bank would not result in would ensure that there was not increased flood impact in that event.
So, thank you. Thank you. You've answered. Yeah.
And from memory, Mr Mayor, the higher propensity properties to be affected was that side,
They were.
the north side, as opposed to Ironwood Drive.
The lowering was to affect the north side because it actually held the water back.
Thank you. I just wanted to.
It does? Yeah. So, councillors, do we have support for the recommendation for no change proposed for S3? Those in favour? Carried? Good. Carried. Thank you, Kate. S4?
S4 was a submission by owners of residential duplex within what is proposed to be the commercial precinct of the new planning scheme within the township zone. It is currently zoned to commercial. The submitter was proposing that it be changed to residential to reflect the existing use as private residences. The response to that we would provide is that planning scheme zoning is to project forward 10 years. It's not necessarily to reflect existing circumstances. It is to project forward and facilitate new uses into the future. When we reviewed the location of it, we considered that it is in that central area in Barcaldine, and we don't propose to change it in response to that submission. Existing lawful use rights continue, so the owners of that property and the occupiers can continue to use it for residential purposes, whatever they choose to maintain that use.
Any questions, councillors?
No.
Support? S5, please.
This was an objection to flood hazard mapping in McWonnell Street, Aramac. It queried the flood risks and had concerns relating to the implications of flood hazard mapping. Similarly to the responses to other flood submissions, the best available 1% annual exceedance probability modelling has been used for Aramac. That comes from the Level 2 township study produced or commissioned by the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. There are differences between what is shown on that and, I guess, historical recollections of people within Aramac. Part of it is probably due to a lack of historic data that could have been called upon and inputted into the modelling to produce that Level 2 township report. But what we have proposed is to continue with what is the best available 1% annual exceedance probability mapping that we have. The past events in Aramac have probably only reflected, or based on the modelling, are thought to have only reflected a closer to 1 in 40 year flood event, so close in excess of a 2% annual exceedance probability event. So we probably just don't have any historic data which actually reflects anything close to the 1% annual exceedance probability event to refine or verify that model any further. In the event, in the future, there was a significant event there and survey data was to be captured from that future event. At that point, when more information is available, modelling could be re-undertaken if there was a desire to refine it further, but at the moment.
Questions?
Yeah, Mr Mayor. Kate, can I ask, the historic data, you say there's not enough for Aramac. Aramac's the oldest town in our shire, so why isn't there historic data that goes far enough back to tell us about the floods? You know.
Would the, we were involved obviously in the preparation of that flood report, but the flood reports look to previous verifiable records, often measured from bomb gauges or survey data. And in some localities, there's just a lack of that historical data or a lack of verifiable bomb gauge information that can be referred to.
So really we come up with flood mapping due to no data at all, really. It's an estimate by the Queensland Reconstruction Authority.
By the flood engineers that they engaged to prepare that report.
Yeah, well, Mr Mayor, as I've discussed with you and with my co-councillors, I've got big problems with the flood mapping for Aramac, and not only McWonnell Street, I think Kerr Street is an issue too. I did take the CEO for a drive and we had a look at some of these areas where we probably have to build 3 metres above where I think any water's ever been. And that's through talking to people that have lived there all their life. The CEO was with me when we went and had a look at some of these places where we think the flood levels come to, and I think the flood mapping that we have for Aramac is just so incorrect that I can't be in favour of it.
Okay, further thoughts on S5? Councillor?
Mr Mayor, if we adopt this, it means that any future development on those blocks has to be at a certain level. We've discussed this, I know, to a certain extent. The persons that are living in those homes, they can renovate and whatever without undue unnecessarily raising. But if somebody was to buy a vacant block there or a house that burnt down, then they would have to replace at this new level.
Kate, can you explain, please, the requirements for the township of Aramac for the consideration that needs to be given to development applications for work inside the flood zone?
Yeah, so the planning scheme applies differently from a separate matter which council has considered and I believe lays on the table in respect of setting levels for building assessment provisions. The flood mapping in the planning scheme triggers a development application or development proposal to be considered in terms of the flood risk, mitigation or management of the flood risk, and as part of the assessment process, council can consider the application made by the person and I guess determine whether the proposal, as the application as formed, acceptably mitigates the risks of flooding. So it does not necessarily mean that there's a specific level that development has to be constructed to. We're required to take a precautionary approach. The best practice is to take a precautionary approach where you don't have verifiable data to refine information in planning. So while this flood mapping may seem generous, it purely acts as a trigger. So new development applications in Aramac may trigger for consideration of flood hazard risks through the development application process, whether this is a material change of use, operational works, or other forms of development. The applicant can make submissions as to how they believe any flood risk is either negligible or is mitigated or managed, and council can then consider on a case-by-case basis through the application process, having regard to the flood hazard overlay code, whether it also considers that flood risk is negligible or has been appropriately mitigated or managed. So the planning scheme flood mapping really is just about triggering consideration of flood hazard risks with new development proposals.
And those there were three areas that a proponent was required to demonstrate their compliance or consideration, Kate?
Yeah, so not storing hazardous materials in a flood hazard area or demonstrating how they're not at risk, that they're elevated and stored at a higher level so as to not cause a problem in the event of flood. Community and public infrastructure that would need to be relied upon in an emergency situation, and making sure people just generally, the requirement to consider that people and property are safe in the event of a flood, for example, that they have the opportunity to evacuate from the premises, or that vulnerable people, elderly, young children, childcare, things like that, are not situated in those areas where it might cause issues in terms of evacuation or disaster management. So there is still opportunity through this process for applicants to provide data to council if they have other data, if they would like to commission their own engineering or flood reports or ground surveys, provide historical photography or records. They can still do that to justify why, even if they're mapped within the flood hazard area, they propose development to be designed in a particular way. And council then has the opportunity to consider whether it accepts the material that they have provided.
So Kate, your advice is from earlier there, that the matter that council has left lay on the table around setting the building heights and a building that is completely separate process to that is outlined in the planning scheme.
Yes, it is a separate process. There is a reference in one of the performance acceptable outcomes in the planning scheme to that 600mm freeboard. That is provided in the planning scheme as an acceptable outcome that somebody could just do. They could choose to design their development in that way, and they just get an automatic tick. It doesn't require further consideration as part of the application process, but there are still the performance outcomes that they can put forward any other alternate development or design proposal they wish. They will just need to show as part of the application why that's still compliant with the flood hazard overlay code. So separate from the building assessment provisions and setting of defined flood levels and things like that, which were referred to. Obviously, because the planning scheme picks up what is the best available 1% annual exceeds probability modelling, in terms of anyone who is going to get a report, their consultant would probably have regard to the reports and the studies that sat behind that and look at, as a reference point, some of those levels in those studies as well. But they have the opportunity to provide alternate solutions as well through the development application process, slightly separately from the building works process.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, Kate, if someone wanted to build just on the north side of McConnell Street now where some of this mapping goes, they would have to get, at their own expense, do some other modelling and create an argument to convince council that they don't have to build to those heights. Is that correct?
The extent of external reporting that they chose to source and the council perhaps required through the further information request aspects of the development application process is a negotiable between the applicant, is still a negotiable between the applicant and council. So if they had other bases on which they could demonstrate that there was minimal, low, negligible change in flood hazard risk by developing a fair lot, and they could meet those sort of performance objectives about keeping people safe, not storing hazardous materials and community infrastructure. It does not always mean that they need a flood hazard report to be specifically prepared. I think it would depend on the nature of the use that was being proposed, the extent to which, I guess, council set the bar in terms of what data it required to assess that application. I think if it's something that involves a lot of people, it would be different to someone building a raised house, which they chose to put there. So that there is still scope to, I guess, do a fit for purpose assessment based on the nature of the development being proposed. And in Aramac, I guess there's also looking at development volume, how many development applications are going to be made and triggered against by this approach. And the other thing is, it is actually strategically directing people to develop and redevelop in those other areas of Aramac in preference to these mapped areas where we know there is no risk.
Yeah, I understand that and can agree with that totally. But I don't believe there's any flood issue in some of these green areas anyway, Kate. So, that's my issue. And I just think the QRA mapping is too far wrong in Aramac, and I think the property rights are affected by the map.
Further question?
Mr. Mayor, I don't know how to word it or how to say it, but would it be a legal binding process if we adopt this and then somebody does want to build a house in Muttaburra or Aramac? We don't want anybody to build a house in the bottom of a creek and get washed away. But if we allowed somebody to build a house not to 600 above that water level, and that house was washed away, it's so freakish, something did happen, could they come back and sue the council? Would it be?
Okay.
Because you're saying that
Thanks, Steve.
I think, I'm sorry, Kate, but I think this, or the council can sort of nearly override this. Like if we pass this, the council, you're sort of nearly saying in my terms that the council, if the person comes to us and says that it's never been flooded, the council can say, yeah, right, well, you can build your house to that standard. that means that the council is actually, we're going to adopt this and then the council can go back and override it. Am I reading that right?
I don't believe it would be sufficient for somebody to just say that this property has never flooded, because I think it's quite obvious in the current environment that places that have never flooded can flood. And so I don't know that someone coming and saying that would be sufficient. The background natural hazard risk and resilience report prepared to support the planning scheme recognised that the nearest possible 1% annual exceedance probability modelling was the way in which council acceptably managed its risks. So I think it would require more than someone just saying that it doesn't, it's never flooded in that location. What somebody could do is go back to the reports of the study from which that model and the mapping came, and they could look at the levels that are referred to in that modelling, and they may be able to show that on the ground, the actual ground level at that location is higher than the level that was shown on the flood mapping model in the studies at that point. That's the kind of, I guess, further investigative work that can be taken. The other thing I think we need to acknowledge is that the level 2 flood mapping data isn't a detailed, it's not a level 3 flood mapping data, it's not a lot by lot, it's not a model that considers mapping or models mapping on a lot by lot scale. It's at a township scale. So I don't think it's sufficient that they just come and say it's never flooded there before. I think there would have to be consideration of the risks. And I guess this puts the onus on them to demonstrate to council as part of their application material that there is no risk or that the risk is manageable to an acceptable level. Council has put the information out there that there is a potential risk in this place.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, and maybe Kate can talk to it. Do we have a rough idea how much that level 3 mapping for Aramac in particular would cost?
Kate?
No, I don't. I think it would meet some of the same constraints that this level 2 modelling.
With that historical data not
The
being
lack of
available.
historic data to be able to input into a model. So that I guess is a risk that sits there if different mapping was to be commissioned. The other thing is, while this mapping could be adopted at this point in time, and we could progress with the planning scheme now, it is one of those things that could be carried over for future investigation and consideration in a future amendment process. So if there was to be a new flood event and we could get additional data, then that may be considered an appropriate time to invest in different modelling or a different study, and the output of that may be able to be inserted into the planning scheme because that would be then the best available contemporary data.
Further questions for S5?
Just look,
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a clarification. I believe we really don't have a choice in adopting this flood overlay. And if we didn't adopt it, the government's going to use it anyway. Is that my interpretation?
Kate?
I guess an issue in terms of process at this point is the planning scheme has been subject to state interest review. Flood hazard mitigation is a matter of state interest, and it successfully got through the state interest review with that mapping in it. If you were to change the flood hazard mapping or remove that flood hazard mapping for, say, a township such as Aramac, that would be a significant policy change, a significant difference to the planning scheme, and it would also be a difference which affects the matter of state interest. So you would be going back through the state interest review process and public consultation for that area. And for those, any property owners affected by that flood hazard overlay level, the state will still require you to demonstrate and produce a report to show how, by taking that action, you still meet the state planning policy and that you're still protecting people and property to an acceptable level through the planning scheme before it would be able to progress further.
Okay, the final decision on whether we meet state planning policy or not rests with the state.
Yeah, so they've already made that through the step prior to going public with the planning.
Sorry, Kate, sorry to interrupt you. What I mean is if council was to change and adopt some other mapping through some other modelling, the final decision on whether that is acceptable or not rests with the state, not council, is that correct?
No, it would rest with council. They just
Right.
wouldn't allow you to progress through their outcome to the
Yep.
state interest review wouldn't be to allow you to progress to the next step until you had addressed it in your way to a level which was acceptable, in a manner that was acceptable to them.
Okay, so technically it rests with us, but we would not be able to proceed. So realistically, they can still veto it, even if we say, yep, this is the mapping we're happy with, comfortable. If it doesn't conform with their expectations, they just won't proceed. We then can't proceed.
Yes. And it would still be on council to, I guess, establish or develop a map to apply. I am not sure, it would be unusual for the state or the planning minister to say this is the map you're going to put in. Having said that, this is the mapping that they commissioned, which satisfied their guidance material at the time.
Mr Mayor, I know we're a fair way down the track and everything with this, but Kate, is there any way that you can say that we don't agree with the mapping done by the engineers for the QRA and we'd like them to revisit it at their expense? Because we think it's too far wrong.
The QRA provides the hierarchy of mapping methodologies, level 1, 2, 3. Level 3 is the more refined mapping, and that is presently with local governments to produce or commission, whether the state was to have some program at some future time in response to some future incident or event. That remains to be unseen.
Through you, Mr Mayor, without more data, particularly pertaining to Aramat, a level 3 flood study is for the cost of it is realistically of no benefit. Because the same inputs, the historical data would be the inputs for that level 3 mapping, most likely.
Okay?
There would be a more refined methodology. So you would probably look at different hydrological scale of hydrological inputs, different level of ground surveying. All of those things have a cost attached to them. But that historical flood data would basically be similar or the same as what is out there. The other thing, I guess, is weighing up the cost of, and that's probably the cost versus how many applications are actually going to trigger assessment against this mapping, and there's historic, I guess, application data there, which would indicate in recent past, not so many development applications. So is it more cost effective to actually consider them on a case by case basis through the development application process as opposed to commissioning level 3 data this time? I guess that's a matter for council.
Councillor, you were about to go, and then Councillor Gleeson.
Mr Mayor, whether we pass this or what, regardless, the query in the question, concern impact to insurance premiums. The insurance companies, most insurance companies would already have a copy of this regardless, so it doesn't really, that's not going to matter whether we pass it further, whatever. So, true and correct? Correct. Thank you.
Just a comment, Mr. Mayor, in part I do agree with that the Aramac mapping, there's issues there around it, but I also hate to see like the likes of Townsville in New South Wales where councils have let developments be built where they shouldn't be and they get flooded. I'm happy to proceed with that, but if we can maybe look into the cost of a level 3 mapping for Aramac in particular, just so that we can have, like if it's $100,000 and if we've only had 3 planning applications in the last 5 years for that area, then as Kate said, if it's a case by case basis, we
See, I'll just make a point, and if I've got it right, it's 2.4 or something 7 in McDonald Street, and then you've got your 600 Freeport. I'm right in saying that for a start.
Kate?
Katie, did you hear me, sorry?
I didn't hear the whole of, I heard the.
So those trigger points in heights, you've got about 2.4, I can't remember exactly now, Kate, 2.4, 2.7 in McDonald Street, but then you've got your 600 freeboarding over the top of that.
But that is separately, in that separate matter that's labelled in terms of regulations, where under the building regulation, council can define certain levels.
But
The council has scope under that to define levels separately from the, I guess, the process here. Those 600 measures are also only acceptable outcomes. So it doesn't mean that it's mandatory. It means that if you design to that standard, you automatically get a tick and you have certain new terms for application going in, and council doesn't have to turn its mind to it any further. Applicants under the building regulation and the planning legislation can apply for something that is different from that. They just have to demonstrate that they can still achieve the planning outcomes that are desired.
Yep, I understand that, but let's just say, so if that person wants to get the tick straight away, they have to go to about 2.4 plus your 600, you get into about 3 metres. Now, if we go 3 metres about up to that glass line there in McDonald Street, the water on the other side of Aramac Creek is going to probably never go out to the common grid. That's how much water is going to be there. We'll be looking for Noah. It's going to be a hell of a lot of water. It's just massive. That's my point. It's just ridiculous.
The mapping indicates that though too, on the other side.
To go out the common grid, no, that wouldn't be anywhere near the common grid.
But it goes off the end of the map.
Yeah, I know, but that's,
You know
it
what I
goes
mean?
a lot further than that, but 3 metres in
It would, but
McDonald.
that map doesn't say that it doesn't either. Like the mapping indicates that it extends much further on the other side of Aramac Creek than it does on the Aramac side.
But Sean, I've lived there all my life, and it's never got there with Canterville.
I'm not disputing that, I'm saying that the mapping does indicate that it won't.
Right.
But
Well,
I'm not
I've had-
suggesting the mapping's right or wrong, what I'm saying is that the map, if you're working on the measurements that you've just given, there's nothing in the mapping that indicates it wouldn't extend even further than that if necessary out on the other side. The mapping doesn't explore any further than that area, but it does carry right to the northern end of the map.
the
Sorry.
mapping on page 139 does, the bigger regional council area view does
I think it blows out there.
OM 2.0. It's well out past the Aramac turn-off by the look of that.
The Ilfracombe Tunnel.
Yeah,
That Ilfracombe turn-off, sorry, yeah.
well and truly past there.
And I would say that's only squared up on
Well, I think that reinforces my point, is that if you're going to have flood water right out there past the Ilfracombe Tunnel, that's a massive amount of water. And we've never seen it get anywhere near that. But look, I've had my say, and I'm not going to. I think the map is wrong in badly too.
So, I'm not going to debate yes or no on whether it's
Yeah.
right or wrong. What's your strategy proposal to deal with it being wrong, in your opinion?
I'd like QRA, if it's their mapping, to revisit it and check that they've got it right.
And we defer proceeding until such time?
Well, I don't want to hold up what you want to do here, Mr Mayor, but there was, Kate did say that we can put something in there to say that this would be done in the future in a revision of the town plan that we could do down the track. Am I right? Is that what you said, Kate?
Yeah, council could make a record of that when a future major amendment is undertaken or chooses to do that, that it reconsiders, one of the matters that it addresses and reconsiders is the flood mapping.
Where would we put that, Kate?
I think it would be more an operational record because it's not uncommon when planning schemes come into effect that whoever is responsible for the administration of the planning scheme within council keeps a record of, I guess, any issues which have emerged in terms of application and also any emergent policy positions that council is taking in other areas, and council can trigger that review process at any point of its choosing under the minister's guidelines and rules.
So that would be something in the motion that we would look at this further in. No?
That's not what I just heard, Kate. Is that right? The recording that would not be a part of the formal resolution adopting the planning scheme. That would be a secondary process. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't think it would be part of it. I think you would resolve to proceed with no change at the moment, but then a future report be generated to commence a major amendment process at some point in the future when council considers that's appropriate to do after the commencement of the planning scheme.
So, Mr Mayor, just explain to me how we do that. Do we put at a future council meeting that we would
After the adoption of the planning scheme, I think is key there. So Kate's last words were we would do that after this is adopted. We would then seek to have a report commissioned for flood mapping at Aramac, and pending the receipt and acceptance of that report, then the lodging of a major amendment submission to the state. Am I correct in summarising that, Kate?
Yeah, one clarification I guess there is that you could actually commission the report separately now as a separate, I guess, item. You could consider commissioning the report separate of the formal amendment process, receive that report and then I guess make a decision after that whether you choose to instigate a major amendment process under the minister's guidelines and rules.
Kate, would simultaneously signalling that to the state cause concern around their approval process?
No, I don't believe so, because what you're putting before them would be the version that reflects the level 2 mapping which they have already seen and signed off on. It would be up to council if it chose to commission or pursue different mapping or more contemporary mapping or different modelling, and to go with that as part of that amendment process. We'll just have to do a natural risks and resilience report similar to the one we prepared in the background to support this document, to show the appropriateness of swapping out the mapping that might be proceeded with here with any newer mapping. But you'll find, for example, in Brisbane, places like that, after every event, they've got new data, they review their mapping, and they do an amendment to refine different parts of their mapping as quite a regular cycle review process.
And so the first part of that process, I would suggest councillors would be, before we resolve to do it, would be resolved to find out how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the amount of future that we might, or applications that we might have in some of these areas, there are some vacant blocks there, but not a lot. But the cost to change it against what we might do in the future, you have to weigh that up too. But I'm sort of more asking that this is mapping done by someone other than us. Can they revisit it? And I know, and they should be doing the mapping, checking their work.
problem for them is the council accepted the document when it was, the problem for us is a previous council accepted the document when it was provided to us after it was commissioned. That's the problem. So asking them to rectify work already done and been received by us
Already accepted.
without the feedback or the commentary to tell them then that we thought it was wrong to pick up on it 13 years later is challenging.
But you do find things wrong with things, over time, Mr. Mayor.
I wouldn't like you to have any expectation that QRA is going to refund it. They don't refund anything. Flat out refunding us day labour to reconstruct our roads, let alone argue with flood mapping on the basis of what they view as limited historical data.
Yeah,
I'm not suggesting that we don't do the study, I just don't want you to.
I'm between a rock and a hard place here because I don't want to spend a fortune on a study either.
I mean, it may not
agree
be.
with the mapping.
It may not be. We have undertaken similar hydrological survey work for the rec park, as has been alluded to earlier in this debate. And I can't recall off the top of my head the exact cost, but it was nothing like $100,000. Now, we would have to ensure that the parameters that are set, as Kate has outlined, the parameters for the flood mapping for the rec park were developed for a different reason. So we would have to ensure that the criteria is clearly outlined to a prospective tenderer for a tier 3 map, and that may come at additional, no doubt will come at additional cost to what we've done for the rec park, but we did have a lot by lot analysis for the rec park as well. So, the figure could range substantially depending on what output is required. It may be that for the benefit of historical accuracy and future planning reasons, a cost of anywhere from $20,000 to $80,000 could be deemed acceptable by council, but what would probably be outside the realms of acceptable would be $200,000 to $400,000, if you know what I mean. So realistically, until we glean A, what's required, and B, how much it will cost to achieve that, it's a little bit early to say that we would or wouldn't rule out commissioning that piece of work.
Yep.
My fear with the whole thing is that a tier 3 map indicates a situation that's worse than's already there.
Mr. Mayor,
But you would have said that before tier 2 mapping was done too, and look what happened. If you had said to a local before that tier 2 mapping was done that the water's going to get to where the tier 2 mapping said it got, they would have said exactly the same thing you just said now. It can't.
Oh, I think it would have been there several times, Mr. Mayor, in some of those maps.
Where the tier 2 mapping is, you think it's right now?
The tier 2 mapping, no.
No. What I'm saying is, if you had have asked a local such as yourself, would the tier 2 mapping have been reflected, like what's reflected in it, if that was possible before it was done? They're all saying that it's not possible now. They would have said it beforehand. So to say now that what a tier 3 map may or may not reflect is not possible, just doesn't line up with the science here. That's my fear. Like, it may not improve the situation based on that local knowledge. Because the local knowledge is not going to have the significant impact that people think it should. It's science-based, not unless there's an event that qualifies in scientists' mind as 1% AEP, then that naturally qualifies straight away. As Kate's referring to, every time they have a 1% AEP, they can upgrade their mapping. Our problem is based on the science that's available. Aramat has only had a roughly 2% AEP event, so it may have quite well had a 1%, but the scientists don't think it has.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Whereas some of our other communities have been fortunate enough to have it, so the mapping's more accurate.
And I wonder how they came up with the variance in those difference, that Alfred's had one and Aramac hasn't.
I don't.
All right.
Section 5. Are we in favour or against? In favour?
At this stage.
Councillor Plum. Councillor Gleeson, we have a majority.
I'm against.
You're against? Against. The proposal will stand. Councillors Gleeson and Peoples have objected, but are proceeding now to S6, please.
Submission 6 is in relation to flood hazard mapping in Marlborough. It also raises a number of other issues. It flags the possibility for opening up housing and development on the western side of town near the old hospital, but notes that that would require infrastructure provision. It identifies errors in the strategic mapping, strategic outcome mapping, similar to Sandra's submission number 1, which we've already addressed. It has concerns with the mapping of some lots of state land within the township zone, and believes that the township zone should be constrained to the fenced area within Marlborough. It notes what it believes is labelling errors in terms of the location of the label on the mapping for Bruford Road. And it suggests some various places within Marlborough that it submits should be considered for local heritage places. In relation to the flooding, I guess similar to what we've discussed in relation to other submissions about flooding, we've already proposed to correct the errors to the strategic outcome map. The township zone, going beyond what the submitter perceives should be the bounds of the township, is about, again, that 10-year planning horizon, and it is state land, so it makes it available for development of township style uses on that land. Obviously there will be issues in terms of tenure and what can occur on that land anyway. Well, proposed some minor amendments to where the labelling on Bruford Road is actually located on the mapping. That road labelling data is actually pulled from the Department of Transport layers, so it's generally accurate. It's just, so we moved it closer to the centre of town to, I guess, satisfy some people who raised that in the community. And in relation to proposed local heritage places, there have been a number of good suggestions through the public consultation process. Through the research and the consultation to go with listing a place as a local heritage place involves a particular body of work, as you would perhaps recall when we did the report previously for the places that are already included in Schedule 3. So my, I guess, recommendation with respect to those places is that none of them seem to be at immediate risk of, I guess, demolition, loss or redevelopment. A lot of them are within the control of council itself. My recommendation is to make no change presently, but again to perhaps carry over operationally as a body of future work that can be considered through a future major amendment, consideration of some additional places which have been raised. These are not the only, this is not the only submission or community feedback received. There are other places as well.
Questions, comments? Support S6 recommendations?
No.
Carried. S7?
So 7A and 7B, this is one where there was a submission and then the neighbour supported the submission with respect to their neighbouring property. These are provided, there's some mapping which we put up as context for this. I believe Aaron
Right.
may have mapping that he can show you.
We have.
These are 2 lots of land which are currently zoned rural. The publicly notified version of the planning scheme proposed to change them to township. So they're down in the sewage treatment, I believe it is in Park Alden. There's 2 lots. Zoned rural, proposed to be changed to township. As I would say with some of the others, from a planning perspective, the change in zoning perhaps reflects a 10 to 20 year planning aspiration for those lots. However, those submitters have raised concerns that by changing their zoning, it will actually have implications for them under the local laws in terms of keeping of animals. So they keep animals there presently, which would require approval to keep that many and that type of animals on that land if it was changed to township land. And the local law references will tend to define township zoning. There are some options here, I guess. The proposal here in the report material is no change. And there's an option to consider, I guess, issuing those particular submitters with an approval or an exemption under the local law to allow them to continue to carry that number and type of animal on their land. From a planning perspective, the change in zoning does not change their existing lawful use rights, so they're lawfully undertaking rural activities on the land. Even if the zone was to change to township from a planning perspective, they retain that right to keep animals on the land. However, the implication here is through a separate
Local laws.
local law, which sits aside. So it's an implication. So the options are proposed don't change, leave them township and respond to the submitter's concern by issuing an approval or working with them in terms of issuing an approval or an exemption under the local laws to continue what they're doing, or to revert the zoning back to rural, because it is currently rural in the current scheme. They've made a submission objecting to the change of their zoning of their land. In terms of reverting back to rural, then we would just have to consider the implications on, I guess, the surrounding uses and whether that provides any gaps or problems in terms of the zoning, the settlement pattern layout or the zoning pattern layout for Calden. Given that that's a community facility and then to the south is an industry precinct, it's not like you're pulling two lots out of the middle of a township. They could be seen to be on the fringe of the township anyway. So I don't think it would be too disruptive to the planning, settlement pattern and zoning to leave them as rural.
So councillors, two choices, is we leave it as is and separate to this process we issue an exemption under local laws, or we change it back to the way it is and we don't have to issue anything. They can continue consistent with their existing use. Implications you need to consider are the irregularity perhaps of the mapping, although Kate's just closed by explaining that, and if you go with the earlier option of the exemption is the Pandora's box you could open in a multitude of applications once they see that exemptions are a possibility for the keeping of animals. Even if you have got a legitimacy of saying, well, we only changed that for the purpose of a rezoning matter under planning and you haven't been rezoned, I still think that you have to be cognizant of the fact that there could be an increase or an influx of requests for exemption. So they're the two things to consider here, two options.
Mr Mayor, what are they entitled to have there if we don't have to change the local law? What animals are we talking?
Well, it's rural, so they can have anything they like.
So they can have it in, yeah, right. So, yeah.
Pigs, ducks,
Cows,
cows.
sheep.
And then if it was township, they wouldn't be able to have certain animals.
Maybe restricted as for.
Questions? Oh, sorry, not questions. Thoughts?
Trip, that's right beside it.
So they want to be in the town area.
No, they don't.
They don't.
Stay rural.
They're currently rural. We're proposing to move them to town. They don't want to because of the impact on their existing use under our local laws, not under plan. Our local laws would prohibit their current activities from continuing in the same manner. We could issue an exemption for them, but that's their concern. That's why they voiced their concern.
They're perfectly rural and they want to stay rural.
Correct. Or they want to maintain their existing use, which the options are an exemption or rezone them back to rural. Or not rezone them, maintain their zoning as rural as it is.
As Kate said, there's no implications, we can leave it rural. We won't change it.
Councillor Plum?
The dog's bark.
Councillor R.
The exemption, would it expire with is it a timed exemption? Does it expire with sale of the property or?
The answer to that was yes, it probably wouldn't go to the new owners, but we'd have to consider on its merit. Depends on our local law and how we amend
If we don't amend it,
it. By application.
Councillor Arthur, your decision. I'll skip you for a bit. Councillor Hanson.
I'd be inclined to leave it as rural, because then it doesn't open that Pandora's box for other people to sort of ask the same exemption.
Councillor Gleeson.
I tend to agree with Councillor Hanson. I don't believe that we should be handing out exemptions because we'll get flooded with different reasons and rhymes. But then on the other hand, hopefully the town grows and gets bigger, and all of a sudden the rural will be in the middle of an industrial area, which is very, very close to it now anyway. I'm a little bit on the fence at the moment.
We've got 3 more councillors to make up which side of the fence you're for. Councillor Nichols.
I'm going to go with Councillor Hanson. I think they've got that, the use there now for their animals. And, yeah, I don't think I want to open the Pandora's box either, so I'll go with Councillor Hanson.
Councillor Rogers.
No change.
I'm fine with staying rural, but I'm just going to ask a question, like if, say, there were new owners or in the future, like can they apply to have that zoning changed in the future?
And we could do it as well.
Into township?
Would there be a major amendment, Kate, to rezone that in the future?
It would be to change the zoning, it would be a major amendment. So there would be some lag time in doing that and the process, resourcing, they would have to go with it.
So you're with Councillor.
Material change of use, say if they want to change rural use into industrial use, would that be very
An
hard?
application, council, considered an amendment.
That wouldn't be a zoning change, that'd be a material change.
And they can, like, just, yeah, that was probably more my question, if in the future someone bought it and intended to use it for industrial purposes, they could make an application to change the use, and it wouldn't, we could approve that if we thought that that was, yeah.
There'd be assessment criteria that they would have to meet for the transition, depending on what the industrial purpose is in the rural zone.
But it's not impossible, it's not, yeah.
It's not impossible, no, Kate, is it?
No, people can apply for anything, it would just depend, they would have to look at the table under the zone code for rural to determine the level of assessment or the assessment process, what they want to do. If it was township, they would have to look at the table that determines the level of assessment for doing that thing in a township, and they'd be assessed against the township.
Councillors, we have a majority to revert it to rural. But I'm going to go to the 3 councillors who have made up their mind to the opportunity.
Sorry.
Councillor,
To go which way?
Which way are you?
No. I'm asking you, what did you say? You're going to
I'm going in favour of leaving it rural, which is the majority of us now.
leaving it as rural.
As rural, yes. So,
They're meted.
Councillor Arthur,
No, I'm with no changes,
no change to rural zone, or no change to the plan.
no changes to the plan.
Councillor Plum,
Yeah, I just, it is rural.
okay, so there will be a change to the planning scheme, Kate, required here. We have considered your recommendation and however have chosen to allow the land to remain in the zone maps as rural.
We will just reflect that in amendments to the resolution in terms of endorsing the consultation report being subject to that, and also endorsing the revised version of the planning scheme, so attachment B, as being subject to reflecting process for.
Okay, I'm going to have to adjourn briefly because we have been going for over an hour and a half here, but also, can I just adjourn? I'm going to adjourn for a brief luncheon interval, if that's possible. Are you available if we were to reconvene in 20 minutes?
Yes, I can be.
Are you sure?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Just adjourning, thank you.